There has been a nuclear accident in the Soviet Union, and the Soviets have admitted that it happened. The Soviet version is this. One of the atomic reactors at the Chernobyl atomic power plant near the city of Kiev was damaged.
Footage from deep inside the Chernobyl Exclusion Zone has revealed a reality so startling that even nuclear experts were left stunned. For decades, Chernobyl has stood as a symbol of nuclear devastation, a place believed to be almost entirely incapable of sustaining life. Yet what the cameras captured suggests that the truth is far more complex. What was once dismissed as a dead land is not as silent as anyone imagined. Life has continued there in secret, enduring, adapting, and even advancing within an environment saturated with harsh radiation. And what now persists quietly within the heart of Chernobyl may force humanity to see this place in an entirely different way. A symbol of decline. In 1986, the explosion of reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant immediately carved its mark into human history as a physical catastrophe. The ionizing radiation released into the atmosphere was recorded by international scientific agencies at levels severe enough to break apart the most basic biological bonds within living cells. The city of Pripyat, once home to tens of thousands of workers and their families, was evacuated in an emergency within just a few days and left abandoned exactly as it was. The pine forest surrounding the plant, which absorbed vast amounts of radioactive dust in the immediate aftermath of the blast, saw its needles turn the color of rust almost overnight before rapidly withering away. Scientists would later identify this area as the Red Forest, a true dead zone, where the contamination in the soil far exceeded the limits that any living organism could endure. A vast restricted area stretching for dozens of kilometers was established, reinforced by military barriers that sealed the entire landscape off from the rest of the world. Over the decades that followed, the image of crumbling concrete buildings, a rusting Ferris wheel standing in the center of an abandoned amusement park, and the complete absence of human presence only strengthened a belief repeated across global media. Chernobyl was seen as a ruin frozen in time forever, a place where the radiation buried deep in the earth would strip nature of any chance to survive. The very idea that life had been utterly erased turned the area into a sealed tomb, where every process within it was assumed to be nothing more than a slow decay governed by the half-life of artificial isotopes. At the time, the scientific lens remained focused almost entirely on measuring the decline of nuclear energy, while overlooking the possibility that biological mechanisms might still be operating quietly beneath the surface. Complete confidence in the physical destructive power of nuclear material against living tissue inadvertently created a vast blind spot in ecological monitoring, leaving the most heavily contaminated core of the zone shrouded in a near-total absence of direct biological observation for decades. Footprints on poisoned ground. The long absence of visual data from the contaminated core eventually pushed wildlife ecologists to seek an indirect way in. Beginning with independent monitoring projects, survey teams installed clusters of motion-activated cameras, triggered by body heat, along ecological corridors deep within the exclusion zone. At first, the purpose of deploying these devices was simply to document the desolation of the silent landscape, track the surface movement of radioactive dust through weather patterns, and perhaps catch sight of a few stray animals showing signs of collapse from acute poisoning. But when the first memory cards were retrieved and brought back to laboratories for analysis, what appeared on high-resolution screens did not match the physiological models of cellular destruction caused by radiation. Infrared footage recorded at night, together with countless clear daytime images, showed the repeated appearance of enormous elk, dense groups of wild boar, and most striking of all, packs of fully grown gray wolves moving with remarkable strength and vitality. These animals were not merely passing through the outer fringes of the zone by accident. They left dense networks of tracks in the snow, extending deep into the very center of the Red Forest, where concentrations of strontium-90 and cesium-137 in the vegetation still remained extremely dangerous. Through the camera lens, the wolves showed no obvious signs of physical degeneration, no hair loss, no damaged mucous membranes, and no surface necrosis of the kind usually associated with creatures exposed to environmental radiation. On the contrary, they moved with exceptional agility, hunted in organized packs, and led along healthy young cubs. The visible muscle mass and skeletal structure captured in the footage directly contradicted every earlier medical assumption about survival within an ecosystem saturated with toxic contamination. The healthy presence of apex predators, animals that stand at the very end of the food chain and therefore face the highest risk of internal radioactive bioaccumulation, right at the center of a landscape infused with fissile material, created a direct conflict with standard scientific calculations. The measured background radiation doses were high enough to be fatal to mammals, yet they could not explain the organized growth of these wild populations. This physiological and mathematical contradiction pushed the entire research system into a dead end, a point at which observation through distant optical lenses could no longer provide an answer to the central question of how living tissue was maintaining stability in the middle of an environment flooded with invisible ionizing energy. Blood samples from the dark zone. The failure of remote observation to explain the biological paradox at the heart of the zone forced research teams to mount brief field missions directly into the territory of wolf packs that had lived there for years. To carry out the work, wildlife researchers and molecular biologists had to wear multiple layers of radiation protective gear, while carrying Geiger-Müller detectors that sounded constant warnings as they moved deeper into land still contaminated with dangerous radioactive particles. Every stage of the approach was calculated with extreme care to keep exposure time as low as possible. The teams followed the wolves through regenerating pine forests, using tranquilizer darts to immobilize healthy adult animals. Once a wolf was temporarily still, the technicians had only a few precious minutes to draw venous blood, collect muscle tissue and skin samples, and attach collars fitted with GPS units and miniature radiation monitors. Throughout the operation, the expedition's exposure meters continuously showed environmental radiation levels far beyond what animal tissue would normally be expected to withstand. Data transmitted from the collars over the following months confirmed a chilling reality. These wolves were living, sleeping, digging dens, and dividing their territories on ground where radiation levels stood many times above international safety limits. With every breath and through every step in the food chain, they were constantly absorbing ionizing particles by every principle of modern medicine and radiation biology. This should have led to biological disaster. Alpha particles, beta particles, and gamma rays passing through living tissue can strip electrons from atoms, creating free radicals that tear through cell membranes and break apart the genetic material inside the nucleus. The usual result is widespread cell death, bone marrow failure, a collapse in white blood cell production, and ultimately the emergence of malignant tumors across multiple organs. And yet, when the blood and tissue samples were preserved under strict cold storage and transferred to advanced laboratories for analysis, the results came as a profound shock. Hematology instruments and clinical testing revealed no drop in immune cells and no signs of microscopic necrosis. The cell membranes of animals living under constant radiation exposure had somehow preserved their structural integrity and a remarkable ability to sustain normal metabolic exchange. Standard diagnostic methods, the same tools used to evaluate both acute and chronic radiation injury, failed completely to uncover any pathological signs severe enough to threaten the wolf population. Even more astonishing, scientists found no evidence of cancerous tumors in a species whose lifespan is long enough for radiation-related chronic illness to emerge. The near-total absence of consequences once considered biologically inevitable pushed the problem far beyond the boundaries of ordinary veterinary science. Measuring clinical health through outward indicators could no longer explain how such exposed living tissue continued to remain stable in an environment flooded with destructive penetrating energy. It was this extraordinary intactness in the blood cells that forced researchers to abandon the traditional physiological approach. They were no longer searching for answers to visible symptoms. Instead, they turned to a deeper level: the molecular structure and the core sequences of genetic coding itself. Only there, they believed, could they hope to find traces of an invisible survival mechanism, a secret hidden inside the bodies of the wolves from the dark zone. The code of a new life. When the genome of the Chernobyl wolf packs was decoded using next-generation DNA technology, geneticists compared it with wolves living in uncontaminated regions, searching for evidence of radiation damage. At first, they expected to find copying errors, chromosomal breaks, or stretches of genes destroyed by gamma exposure. Instead, the results pointed in the opposite direction. The DNA of wolves living in the core zone had not passively deteriorated. It had undergone a process of reorganization in some of the most critical regions of the genome. The most striking differences were concentrated in gene clusters linked to the immune system, inflammatory response, and above all, the mechanisms responsible for identifying and eliminating cells at risk of turning cancerous. The Chernobyl wolf population showed genetic traits suggesting stronger antioxidant defenses, along with a faster ability to repair DNA breaks caused by radiation. Most remarkable of all, patterns of gene transcription in their blood shared notable similarities with data seen in human cancer patients undergoing radiation therapy. Yet unlike humans, who are often weakened by the side effects of exposure, these wolves appear to have transformed a poisoned environment into the foundation of a natural resistance to cancer. According to conventional evolutionary biology, a complex adaptive trait tied to immune function would normally require thousands of years to emerge through natural selection. And yet, in Chernobyl, in less than 4 decades since the reactor explosion, the wolf population had already displayed a profound shift at the level of molecular coding. That discovery forced the nuclear disaster to be seen not only as a force of total destruction, but also as an extreme pressure capable of driving biological change at an astonishing speed. This phenomenon challenges many of the central assumptions of radiation physiology. There has never been a clear precedent for a higher animal developing in such a short span of time. A genome with powerful anti-cancer potential simply to survive in a lethal environment created by human hands. The existence of that genome has transformed the way scientists understand what may truly be unfolding behind the barbed wire fences of Chernobyl. A double barrier of protection. The confirmation of a mutated genome capable of repairing itself has completely overturned the way humanity views Chernobyl. For decades, the exclusion zone was seen simply as a contaminated region that had to be sealed off in order to protect people from radiation. But when those fences, guard posts, and restrictions are placed alongside the data on radiation-resistant wolf populations, the meaning of that entire system of control begins to change. Radiation, lethal to human beings, has unintentionally formed an ecological wall that keeps people out, creating a space of near-total isolation where an extraordinary evolutionary process can unfold without disruption from urban expansion, industry, or hunting. What is truly unsettling is not that radiation is destroying nature, but that nature appears to be using the very lethal environment created by humanity to redesign itself. Within that sealed world, human beings, the species that once imagined itself the summit of evolution, now seem fragile, outdated, and perhaps the most vulnerable of all. While the human body quickly collapses under nuclear exposure, wild predators continue to move freely through poisoned forests as though they have entered an environment perfectly suited to their survival. In that sense, the barrier of radiation, intended to drive humanity away, has also become a shield that preserves the silence needed for an ecosystem to elevate itself beyond its former limits of survival. In the heart of Europe, a refined and almost unprecedented form of cellular resistance is multiplying freely within wild animal populations. The wolves captured by camera traps are no longer merely survivors of disaster. They have become a storehouse of genetic information whose value extends far beyond the ordinary reach of medicine. That realization places intense pressure on the entire structure of modern knowledge. Humanity has long believed that environments devastated by technological failure could lead only to extinction, and that the consequences of nuclear physics always point toward a clear and measurable death. Yet the emergence of DNA structures with apparent immunity suggests something even more unsettling. Human catastrophe may be only the opening stage of a new ecological void, a place where nature does not decline, but begins to function at a harsher and more formidable level of survival. This transformation no longer resembles a random deformity. It looks more like a new path in biological evolution, one in which humanity may have neither the power to participate nor the ability to control. A living body capable of rewriting its own genetic code in order to resist death at the cellular level immediately shakes the physiological boundaries that human beings once believed could never be crossed. At the same time, it opens the door to immense and deeply troubling questions about the genetic secret hidden within that land. The preservation of fear. The growing body of biological data on the cancer resistance of Chernobyl wolves quickly began to encounter invisible resistance when it came into contact with systems of international oversight. While detailed studies of the genetic changes within these populations circulated quietly within the world of molecular biology, mainstream media and major documentaries continued to reinforce the image of Chernobyl as a barren nuclear tomb. Between the scientific data and the story presented to the public, a clear divide remained. Whenever independent research teams sought permission to carry out deeper field studies and collect more biological samples from this altered ecosystem, they often ran into layer upon layer of barriers imposed in the name of radiation safety. Bringing mobile genome sequencing equipment or biochemical analysis systems into the exclusion zone became increasingly difficult because of dense administrative procedures, prolonged risk assessments, and refusals that often arrived without any clear written explanation. Regulatory bodies did not deny the presence of healthy animal populations because the camera data was impossible to dismiss. Yet, they used the very framework of radiation danger to blur the scale and meaning of the biological phenomenon unfolding there. Most international research resources continued to be directed toward measuring radioactive contamination in the soil, monitoring the structural stability of the reactor enclosure, and maintaining the isolation of the area itself. Meanwhile, deep investigation into DNA changes within wild animals was almost always pushed to the very bottom of the priority list. This tightening of access and narrowing of scientific focus reflects a defensive reflex within the modern system of knowledge and politics. If the world were forced to acknowledge that one of the most radioactive environments on Earth might also be nurturing an advanced immune mechanism against cellular damage, then many long-standing assumptions about the absolute consequences of nuclear energy would begin to tremble. The issue is no longer merely an intriguing zoological discovery. If this phenomenon were widely revealed, it could influence how humanity thinks about nuclear power, security policy, weapons control treaties, and even the psychological order built from the fear of atomic destruction after the Cold War. For a long time, the image of Chernobyl as the perfect symbol of nuclear apocalypse has formed part of the architecture of global deterrence. Because of that, preserving that image may be seen as more important than opening the way toward an entirely new biological frontier. Strict limits on access, together with a selective silence surrounding genetic reports, have separated the truth of this evolutionary process from public awareness. Chernobyl is therefore not only a forbidden physical territory, but also a vault of biological secrets. The interruption of deeper research efforts does not arise solely from the harshness of the environment. It also stems from the fact that structures of power cannot easily accept a reality capable of shattering the familiar image of nuclear catastrophe that the world has long relied upon to preserve its sense of balance. The veil that hides evolution. The rupture between what humanity believes about the destructive power of radiation and what DNA may be able to restore beyond all expected limits is the central reason the image of Chernobyl as a dead land has had to be preserved before the public. The familiar story of a city frozen in time, with dust-covered toys, abandoned classrooms, and rusting structures, is repeated again and again because it serves a fear that is clear, easy to grasp, and easy to control. That landscape reinforces the belief that humanity possesses the ultimate power of destruction, and that nuclear radiation is a permanent sentence upon every ecosystem it touches. Yet a far more shocking truth has remained almost entirely confined to technical reports, with little presence in mainstream media. Within the exclusion zone, creatures bearing signs of genetic transformation appear to be rising with extraordinary force. If it were widely acknowledged that a terrible industrial catastrophe had inadvertently become the launching ground for a dramatic biological adaptation, then the entire script of ecological doom that the world has trusted for decades would begin to tremble. The images captured by hidden cameras inside the zone do more than show wolf packs moving across the frozen snow. They stand as evidence of an evolutionary process unfolding on its own terms. At the very edge of extreme contamination, nature seems to have found a way to move beyond cellular injury, reshape the immune system, and continue evolving, while human beings are forced to remain outside the warning barriers because of the fragility of their own physiology. It suggests a cold and unsettling reality. Nature does not collapse under the weight of human error. Instead, it removes humanity from the equation of survival, then uses the toxic remains to forge a new ecosystem. For that reason, preserving the story of Chernobyl as a nuclear graveyard is not simply a matter of media framing, it is also a psychological defense mechanism of modern civilization itself. By holding on to that tragic image, humanity protects the illusion that it still stands at the center of life on Earth. The black and yellow warning signs around the isolation zone no longer seem to mark only a disaster from the past. They also resemble a curtain drawn across a biological future that is quietly taking shape. Human beings are not kept from entering that place only to spare them death from radiation. They are also kept away from a truth that unsettles human pride at its deepest level. Nature may be capable of learning to endure, adapt, and move beyond even the most brutal instruments of destruction ever created by human hands. And perhaps the most unsettling evolution of the modern age is unfolding in silence. In the very place where humanity no longer belongs.